The dog was already bleeding when Harlow ran toward it. Not walked, not approached. Ran. Across the parking lot of the Levy's ferry terminal, still in her field jacket. Bag swinging off one shoulder, coffee she'd never get to drink still in her other hand. She didn't think about it. That was the thing people kept asking her afterward. The thing she could never explain properly. She didn't decide. Her body just went. The Belgian Malinois was straining against its leash, tied to a concrete post near the terminal entrance, and the man standing over it had his boot raised. Not in warning, he'd already brought it down once. The dog, big, trained, the kind of animal that didn't make noise unless it had to, was making noise. Harlow had seen a lot in her 33 years. She'd done 2 tours with the Canadian Forces as a combat medic, 1 rotation in Mali, and 1 she didn't talk about at dinner tables. She'd learned to read situations fast, threat or no threat, move or hold, breathe or don't. The man with his boot up was not confused or frightened. He was angry in the particular way that enjoys itself. Hey, she stopped maybe 4 meters away. Hey, back up. He turned around slowly, that kind of slow. Mind your business, he said. The dog looked at her. Even injured, even scared, it looked at her the way trained dogs do. With focus, with a question. Are you the one? She held his gaze and took 1 step to the left, positioning herself between him and the animal. That was the last calm moment. She'd come back to Quebec 14 months earlier, after her release from the forces. Not discharged. She'd chosen to leave. Though the line between choosing and being worn down past choosing had blurred somewhere over the Atlantic on a flight she barely remembered. She'd grown up in St. Nicholas, just across the river from Lévis, and coming back felt less like a homecoming and more like setting down a bag she'd been carrying too long. She wasn't sure she was done carrying it. She just needed somewhere to set it for a while. She was working shifts at the CLSC in Lévis, triage and urgent care, filling in for a permanent position that was taking its time becoming permanent. The work suited her. It wasn't the adrenaline she'd known overseas. Nothing was, and she wasn't sure she wanted it to be. But it had the same core. Assess, act, stabilize. People coming in frightened or in pain, needing someone to be steady. She could be steady. That part, at least, had stayed. The ferry terminal was a 10-minute walk from her apartment. She went there sometimes on her days off, just to sit by the river. The St. Lawrence in November is not a kind river. It's gray and serious and very wide. And there's something about looking at something that big and indifferent that put her own mind in proportion. She'd started doing it without really deciding to. A lot of the better things in her life had started that way. That Tuesday morning, she was heading to an early shift, cutting through the terminal lot because it saved 5 minutes, and because the cold came off the water in a way she'd come to like. She heard the dog before she saw it. Not the whimper, the silence between the sounds. The particular held breath of an animal that has learned the wrong things about people. His name, she found out later, was not important to what happened. He was 26. He'd been asked to leave the terminal cafe, and he'd redirected his anger sideways. The dog was tied to the post. He had a knife, a folding knife, the kind you can buy at any hunting supply store, the kind that is not made for what he used it for. Harlow didn't see the knife until she was already between them. She felt the first one as impact more than pain. Her left side, below the ribs, the shock of it more than anything else. She grabbed the post with one hand, more from surprise than strategy. "Walk away," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. He didn't. The second time she was ready for it, which didn't mean she could stop it. only that she understood what was happening. She registered the mechanics the way she'd registered wounds in the field. Entry point, likely trajectory, how bad can they move? She ran the same assessment on herself, standing up. She did not fall down. This was the part that later, in the hospital room, when people were trying to understand it, she had the hardest time explaining. Not pride or toughness, something older. When you have moved wounded people through hostile terrain, when you have held pressure on injuries while rockets came down 300 meters away, your body learns a different relationship to pain. It files it, acknowledges it, does not necessarily obey it. She stayed between him and the dog. By the time it was over, and it was over fast, faster than the telling of it, a man from the cafe had come out, and 2 more from the parking lot, and someone was on the phone. She had 5 separate wounds, and she was still on her feet. Barely. The cold from the pavement was starting to come up through her boots, which she recognized as a sign that her legs were beginning to negotiate with the rest of her. She sat down against the post. The dog pressed its side against her arm. "Okay," she said to the dog or herself or both. "Okay." The paramedics who arrived knew within 90 seconds that she'd had medical training. Not from anything she said. She wasn't saying much, but from the way she'd been applying pressure to her own side with the heel of her palm, in exactly the right place, with exactly the right force, without being told. One of them, a young woman named Elodie, would tell her later that she'd thought at first there was a second person helping. There wasn't. They stabilized her in the lot, got her into the ambulance, and drove fast. She asked about the dog twice before she went under. The second time, Elodie told her the animal was alive, and that animal control had been called, and that she needed to stop talking and let them work. The firmness of it, the professional kindness, reminded Harlow of her own voice in the field. She stopped talking. She let them work. The dog's name was Kodiak. She learned this 8 hours later when she was out of surgery and into a room that smelled like every hospital room she'd ever been in. Antiseptic and recycled air, and that particular quiet that isn't peace, but the shape of peace, the outline of it. Her left side was bandaged and elevated, and she felt the particular dull weight of serious painkillers doing serious work. There was a man asleep in the chair by the window. He was maybe 60, broad through the shoulders in the way of men who used to be bigger, wearing a half-zip fleece with a small Canadian flag patch on the sleeve. The kind that veterans organizations give out, not the kind you buy at a souvenir shop. His right hand was resting on his knee, and even in sleep, his posture was a soldier's posture, present, organized, ready to come back quickly. She watched him for a moment, looked around the room, got her bearings the way she'd been trained. Where am I? What time is it? What do I know? What don't I know? She knew she was in the Centre Hospitalier de Lévis. She knew it was night. She knew she'd been in surgery, which meant at least one of the 5 had been serious. She knew she was thirsty. She didn't know how the man in the chair had gotten there or who he was. She reached for the water on the bedside table, and he was awake before her fingers closed around it. That soldier's thing, the hair-trigger surface of sleep that never quite switches off. "I've got it," he said, and handed it to her without making her ask twice, which she appreciated more than she expected to. "Thanks," she drank. "Who are you?" "Bouchard," he said, and then corrected himself with the habit of a man who'd been military long enough that last names were the default. "Henry Bouchard, retired. I was Kodiak's handler. Before my hip." She looked at him. "The dog," he said. "I know," she said. "Where is he?" Something moved across Bouchard's face, not sentimentality exactly, but the older thing underneath it. "That's the part," he said carefully, "that I came to tell you in person." Kodiak had been a service dog for 3 years, since his retirement from the RCMP canine unit. Bouchard had served 22 years with the forces. Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, 2 tours in Afghanistan, 1 in Bosnia, and come home with the things that don't show on X-rays. The RCMP canine unit had paired them through a veterans program that Bouchard described, with the economy of a man not given to self-disclosure, as the thing that sorted me out. Kodiak had been tied to the post because Bouchard had gone into the terminal cafe to use the washroom. It was a short stop. They did it sometimes on their morning walks. The dog knew how to wait. "He didn't make noise while I was inside," Bouchard said. He was looking at his hands. "Started after." Harlow said nothing. "I came out when I heard it." He paused. "You were already. I was too far. By the time I got there, the other men had the guy on the ground, and you were sitting against the post, and Kodiak was." He stopped. "Started again. He had his head on your lap. Wouldn't move. Not for me. Not for the paramedics. They had to call someone to take him separately." She thought about that. The weight she'd felt against her arm, and then later. Had there been something on her legs? She'd thought it was shock, the body going strange, but she'd been cold, and the weight had been warm. "He's with my daughter right now," Bouchard said. "She lives 10 minutes from here. He's fine. The vet cleared him. His voice did something careful on the last sentence. "He ate this evening. First time since this morning." They sat with that for a moment. "Your daughter," Harlow said. "Is she the one who found out my name?" Bouchard allowed himself a small, sideways thing that might have been a smile. "She's resourceful, yes. She slept again, and when she woke it was morning, and Bouchard was gone, and there was a Tim Hortons coffee on the bedside table, still warm, with a sticky note that said, 'Double, assumed. HB. She hadn't told him how she took her coffee. She filed this detail without knowing what to do with it. The physiotherapist came at 9, the surgeon at 10. The CLSC called at 11 to say her shifts were covered and not to worry, which she hadn't been. She'd been thinking about Kodiak eating his dinner, but she said thank you anyway. Her sister called from Calgary and cried, which was generous of her and also exhausting. A police officer came to take her statement and wrote everything down without editorializing, which she appreciated. At 2 in the afternoon, she heard something in the hallway, not loud. Almost the opposite of loud, a kind of organized quiet. The sound of many people trying very hard to move without making noise, which paradoxically makes a particular kind of noise. She'd heard it before, in a completely different context, but the human body knows that sound. The sound of people gathering with purpose. The nurse who came to check her, IV, looked out the hallway window and then looked back with an expression Harlow didn't immediately know how to read. "There are some people here," the nurse said. "What kind of people?" The nurse considered how to answer this, the kind with very good posture. Bouchard came back in first. Behind him, through the door, she could see the hallway. It was full. Not chaotic. The opposite of chaotic. They were standing in rows, or as close to rows as a hospital hallway allows. Men and women in civilian clothes, in veterans organization jackets, in old unit sweatshirts, faded to the particular softness of things worn many times. Some had medals on their chests. Most didn't bother with the display. They ranged from maybe 25 to well into their 70s. There were people in wheelchairs. There were people who'd driven. She would learn later. from Trois-Rivières, from Sherbrooke, from Rimouski. One man had come from Fredericton. She counted, then stopped counting. Bouchard, she said. Her voice was steady. The rest of her, less so. Word got around, he said, in the tone of a man who had actively ensured that word got around, but was not going to take credit for it. These are your people? Some. He looked out at the hallway. Some are yours. She didn't understand that until later, until a woman her own age stepped through the door in a 2CMBG sweatshirt. And Harlow recognized the particular angle of her posture before she recognized her face. Combat medic. She didn't know her personally. It didn't matter. There's a way people who have done certain things hold themselves. And you know it the way you know a language you both speak. Then there was another and another. Veterans, serving members on leave, spouses of veterans, children of veterans who'd grown up and put on uniforms themselves. A retired military nurse from the Royal Canadian Medical Service. 2 Laval paramedics who'd heard about it from LOD. A woman who'd been Bouchard's corporal in Bosnia and now ran a welding business in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu and had driven 90 minutes. They came in pairs and small groups, introduced themselves or didn't, stood or sat or found chairs in the hallway and did not leave. 143 people, the hospital administrator told her later, quietly overwhelmed. She didn't say much. There wasn't much to say. These were not people who needed speeches. They'd been to enough of the events that required speeches to have developed a healthy skepticism about them. They came because it was the thing to do when one of yours went down, even if you didn't know her. Even if the reason she went down was not a military reason, was not a reason anyone could have planned for, was just a woman seeing a dog in trouble and not walking past. Especially then, maybe. Bouchard's daughter, her name was Sylvie, mid-30s, with her father's solidity and a pediatric nurse's particular brand of gentle pragmatism, came in the late afternoon. She had Kodiak with her. This was not, technically speaking, permitted. Sylvie had resolved this problem by the straightforward method of deciding not to ask permission in advance and being very calm when questioned afterward. She had a folder of his therapy animal certifications that she produced with the efficient authority of someone who had done considerable preparatory research. And the floor supervisor, perhaps noting the 143 people still in the hallway, concluded that this was not the battle she needed to fight today. Kodiak came into the room and stopped at the foot of the bed. He was a big dog, 70 pounds at least, with the focused alertness of his breed. The Malinois never quite relaxes. They're always working the edges of the room, reading what's happening. He read what was happening. He looked at Harlow. She looked at him. He put his chin on the edge of the mattress. She put her hand on his head, and he closed his eyes, and that was that. She didn't cry in front of anyone. She was very certain about that afterward. But Sylvie looked out the window for a while, and Bouchard studied his shoes, and no one said anything for a long enough time that it wasn't awkward, but something else entirely. The kind of quiet that only happens when something real is in the room, and everyone has the sense to leave it alone. He was looking for you, Sylvie said, finally. Last night. He was going to the door every 20 minutes. My dad timed it. I did not time it, Bouchard said. He timed it, Sylvie said. She was in hospital for 6 days. The deepest of the 5 wounds, the third, just below her left floating rib, had nicked something internal that the surgeons had repaired with confidence, but wanted time to watch. She was a good patient by the metrics that matter. She didn't argue with the nursing staff. She slept when she was supposed to. She did the physio exercises with the seriousness of someone who has rehabbed other people's injuries and understands the stakes. She was a slightly less good patient by other metrics. She asked too many clinical questions and had to be actively prevented from reading her own chart. Bouchard came every day, not for long, an hour, sometimes less. He brought coffee exactly twice, and on the third day brought a thermos of his daughter's chicken soup, which Harlow accepted with the private acknowledgement that it was the best thing she'd eaten in 6 days and possibly longer. They talked in the way of people who communicate more efficiently than most, because they've both learned that time can be short, directly, without preamble, about things that mattered. He joined at 19, the year she was born. He'd been in Srebrenica before the fall, when the world was still deciding whether to pay attention, and he didn't discuss it. But she could read the outline of it in the spaces where he didn't speak. She told him about Molly, the parts she could tell. They didn't compare. People who've actually been through things rarely compare. She asked him once, on the 4th day, what the first year back had been like. He thought about it for a while. Like trying to remember how to walk, he said, except the floor had changed while you were gone. She turned that over. Does it come back? The walking? Yes. He looked out at the river, visible from her window on a clear day, flat and gray and wide. The old floor, no. But you learned the new one. The man who had done it appeared in court 4 weeks later. She was not in the courtroom. She was back at work by then, half shifts at the CLSC, getting her body back to where she needed it. She learned about the proceedings from Sylvie, who had attended and sent her a summary in a text message that managed to be simultaneously precise and vindicating. He pled guilty to 2 counts of aggravated assault. Kodiak counted, which she found both legally interesting and personally satisfying. And the sentence, handed down in the new year, was significant. The judge, a woman from Quebec City who had apparently done her research, noted in her remarks that targeted violence against both a working service animal and the person who intervened to protect it warranted the court's serious attention. Harlow read the remarks twice, put her phone down, went back to work. She still goes to the ferry terminal sometimes. Not as often. She takes the long way around more than she used to, not from avoidance, but because the longer route goes past a bakery that does a very good maple butter croissant, and she's made peace with making decisions for small good reasons. But she goes. Kodiak comes with her now, on Sunday mornings, when Bouchard's hip is giving him trouble and Sylvie can't make it. Harlow and the dog walk the length of the terminal and back, which takes about 20 minutes at his pace, which is a pace that investigates everything. He checks the post, every time. She's watched him do it enough to know it's not anxiety. It's the same thing she does when she passes difficult places. The same checking in, the same registration of what is here now versus what was here then. He sniffs the concrete and moves on. She watches the river for a minute, the particular gray of it in the early cold, the width of it, the way it keeps moving, without asking anyone's permission. Then they go get coffee. She takes hers double-double. He gets a Timbit, which is not endorsed by his vet, and which Bouchard has asked her twice to stop giving him, and which she will continue to give him at irregular intervals for as long as he'll take it. Which, if she has any say in it, will be a very long time. That's not a promise anyone made her. It's not a contract or a commendation or a ceremony. It's just 2 creatures who found themselves on the same side of something and decided, without much discussion, to stay there. Some things don't need more explanation than that.